Hey, gang, welcome to the Power of Nine podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Eggert. Today's guest is a kilt-wearing, comic book collecting king of e-commerce and a dude that I'm super proud to call my friend, Mr. Darin Lynch. Darin, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Aaron. Proud to be here. Proud to be your friend.
Yeah, awesome, man. We have known each other for many moons. I think it's probably been 5-6 years, right? Back in the iSpace days.
A little bit longer. I think we moved into our office 7 years ago or almost 8, and we met a year before that.
Yeah.
So quite a while now.
Yeah, time goes by fast. That was pre-bat poll.
It was pre-bat poll, yeah.
Yeah.
Pre a lot of things, really.
Pre a lot of things. I remember the first time I met you, I walked into your office in Edina, and I'm like, there's no way that this dude should be in this office. Like, it was so disjointed, and it's such a cluster F that I was like, all right, this guy's got to step it up a notch.
Right. Like, it was a nice enough office, but it was dated. We had outgrown it culturally and physically. I like to describe it as kind of looked like something from the set of the Golden Girls. And I love the Golden Girls. It's hilarious. That's not our office.
Yeah. The Golden Girls doesn't really emulate your personality or brand either. Yeah. All right. So I want to get started here and just have our listeners get a little familiar with you and your background and stuff. And I think I just made a comment to you prior to us starting the recording is when was the last time you were on a podcast? Last week. And so I think people have a general understanding of who you are and the culture you've built, but I want to dig into some of these things a little bit. You are a proud product of Northeastern Iowa. So you went to the University of Iowa, but tell me a little bit about your upbringing. What kind of got you to that next stage in life where you went to college, but pre that time, growing up in the central region of Iowa?
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm in Northeast Iowa. My hometown is Nashua, which if you blink, you'd miss it. It's small. I graduated 59 people, 61 if you count the 2 foreign exchange students. I don't know what the hell they did to get excommunicated in my hometown. It was a pretty nice town. We had really good school. We had a computer lab real early. Obviously, I'm going to be dating myself here, but I think it was 1983 when I was in 7th grade, and we opened a computer lab. And we were about an hour from Waterloo or Mason City. Those were the quote unquote big towns that we would go to on special occasions, you know?
Yeah.
And so it was definitely a farm upbringing, but my mom was an English teacher in high school and an English professor at Wartburg College, if anybody's heard of that. My dad was a farmer. There's pictures of me at 5-6 years old on the tractor wearing a tie. And so I think that mom and dad knew I wasn't going to be a farmer when I grew up. And, I was always a fan of business and business people and things like that. So I think I grew up knowing that I was going to be doing something else. I have a lot of respect for that, but that just wasn't my calling.
Yeah, right. Work ethic is probably built into you, right? That's ingrained into your bones, but you decided to go another path. You know what I think is really, everyone knows about your pride in your Irish heritage. And I was fascinated to hear this when you were telling me the story, is that, so your dad is not your actual biological father. Your biological father is your Irish side. And tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, I don't talk about this too much, not because it's painful to talk about, but it's not the kind of thing that comes up just naturally when you're talking about last night's game, or you're out having points. My biological dad, his last name was Lynch, and he died when I was 2. He was 100% Irish. By the way, I'm 3/4 Irish, but according to what I've been told, I'm not taking any of those DNA tests because they just go down, right?
Don't wreck that. Yeah.
So I'm 3/4 Irish. My dad was 100% Irish. And so he passed away when I was 2. I don't really remember him. Sometimes I think I do, but I can't tell if I'm remembering him or imagining him, My mom remarried when I was just right around 5. And she remarried if everybody can follow this, my biological dad's brother, so my biological uncle, Dean Lynch. She remarried Uncle Dean's best friend. So Jerry Dietz is the only dad I've ever known. He's been an incredible dad, great parents. And so from 5 years old on, he's been my dad. but I kept my Lynch name, which I'm really happy my mom made that decision. And I was blessed really to grow up with 3 families because my dad's family welcomed me, the Deeds family. My mom's family, of course, was always a great family. Armstrong's, she's from Illinois, half Irish. And then the Lynch side really welcomed me, of course, because my dad passed away. And so I think they bequeathed upon me a lot of the love and affection they had for him. And my Uncle Dean, my biological uncle, lived right down the gravel road. Like if Kirby Puckett could have hit a baseball to his house.
Yeah.
So I grew up really close with him because he and my dad are still best friends. So I think that unknowingly, when I named Irish Titan, a big part of it was that nod to my heritage. And I was 34 when I started Irish Titan. And so I think that here, I just turned 50. I have 2 daughters, 21 and 17. I think at different stages in your life, you become conscious of different things. And I don't think I was conscious at the time of the importance of the heritage and my relationship with the Lynch side of my family when I named it. But that's definitely part of why I celebrate that Irish heritage and shenanigans and the kilts and the shamrocks.
What's it like to be spoiled by grandparents when you're an Irish kid from an Irish side of the family?
It's fantastic.
Right?
My grandma and grandpa Lynch were fantastic. I was blessed with great grandparents all over the place. But my Uncle Dean, almost every weekend, would take me to see them. They lived in an even smaller town, about 15 minutes away, about 160 people, I think. And it was kind of town, if you weren't Catholic, I think you kind of got run out of town at that time, on those days. And he'd take me up there for breakfast, and then he would leave, and I'd spend the weekend with them. And I bet until I was 10, I spent 3/4 of the weekends with them. And it was great. I was really, really tight with them. I missed them.
So when you were growing up and you were deciding that you wanted to go to college, was it like predetermined that you had to go to the University of Iowa? I mean, we probably knew, because if you're going to be in northeastern Iowa, isn't it like sacrilege to go to Iowa State?
Well, there's a pretty big divide, right? But there's a bit of an unknown. There's University of Northern Iowa, which is in Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and that's actually super close. So I go to a lot of basketball camps there and stuff. But I almost went to Drake, actually, which is in Des Moines. I was never going to go to Iowa State. No way.
Let's just get that out of the way.
Actually, yes, offense to cyclones. But I almost was, I was planning, not really planning. I was leaning toward going to Drake. And then I visited Iowa on a nice spring day. A lot of people out on campus, great vibe. I had grown up a Hawkeye fan. I was blessed to have an academic scholarship to Iowa. And so some of the costs were inconsequential. And again, I'm grateful for that. But I was walking around the campus and just seeing all the mojo, the vibe. And I'm like, I'm going to Iowa. So it didn't take much of a nudge. And went there 89 to 93, loved it, had a great college experience, both academically and socially. I was a computer science major at first and got pretty bored the first year, not because I was the next Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or anything, more because just the bits and the bytes didn't really excite me all that much.
Right.
So I switched over to business and was an MIS, corporate finance double major. MIS is kind of computer science light. It's a few less computer classes and a lot more business classes. And so that was my major coming through Iowa when I graduated in 93.
And then so you went then over to Des Moines and you worked for Principal, and did they come to college to recruit kids, and then that's how you figured out about it, or was it some other natural progress?
Yeah, no, that was exactly it. I mean, everybody kind of knew about Principal Financial Group. You know, it's a giant employer, especially by Iowa standards. And so they recruited pretty consistently. They had a booth in the big job fair in what is called the Union, if I remember where it was, and really liked the recruiter. It wasn't too hard to find a job. I had some offers from multiple places coming out with a major like that. And so took that job and was actually really excited for it. And Principal was great, but it really was, I think, because that recruiter was there. I liked him. He was a cool guy. And I actually landed that in November of my senior year, and I didn't graduate until the spring. And so that made my spring semester super great, because I already had my job locked down.
Yeah.
And then went over there in summer '93 and was in Des Moines working for Principal Financial Group for almost 5 years.
And you and I have had this conversation about leaders in your life and people who've had a significant impact on you and the trajectory that you've made as a leader. And talk to me a little bit about your boss that you had there. You refer to him as your boss. I think the word leader is probably better, but talk about him a little bit.
Well, to be honest, I've been blessed with really good bosses most of the way. A couple exceptions here and there,
Yeah.
but I've been blessed with really good bosses, managers, leaders,
Yeah.
really from the very beginning. And my first boss was a guy named Jeff Wiley, who I like to say is the best boss I've ever had. And I think some of that's nostalgia, right? Like my first boss was a great boss, and so there's a little bit of extra affinity there.
Yeah.
But he taught me really quickly the differences between leadership and management. He invested a lot of time in exposing me to some people management and change management, org design, org strategy sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
And really taught me, the value of being very intentional about who you work with and work for. And then I was actually blessed. My second boss is who turned out to be his wife, Wendy. And she was great. I'm still friends with both of them. My third boss was a guy named Jeff Hodges. I'm going through my bosses at Principal Financial Group, and they were all great. But Jeff really had an impact on me. And I think part of the reason too is he doesn't have a college degree. He went to West Point and went sort of out of defiance to prove to his parents that he could get in there because they had told him that he couldn't.
Yeah.
And he was there, I can't remember, it was a year or two, and then moved on, and I think moved to Phoenix first and then Des Moines, but he didn't have a college degree. And I loved that, quite honestly, because my parents, to kind of circle back to being blessed with great parents, my mom has her master's, almost her PhD. My dad has 4 days of college. He went to UNI for 4 days, and he still says he'll go back when everybody catches up to him. That's one of his lines.
I like that.
And so I grew up in a household, of parents on opposite ends of the education spectrum and mom never talked down to dad for having 4 days of college, and dad never felt insecure about that. So a college degree is something that's, worthy of a lot of respect, but there are a lot of people out there that are very smart and capable that don't have college degrees. And when I met Jeff and found that out, I think that was even a little bit more of an affinity for him as my first boss.
So as you were at Principal, I think you probably you said you were there for about 5 years and your time had come. It was time to transition. Where did you go from Principal?
Yeah, so I was newly married at the time, and my now ex-wife, we're super amicable, still talk all the time. We were looking at moving out of Des Moines. There was nothing at all wrong with Des Moines. It was safe, all those sorts of things, right? But it wasn't what Des Moines has become now. Des Moines is actually a pretty good city now. They've invested a lot in a lot of the right things, but it was just sort of boring back then. No offense, Des Moines. And one of my favorite things is Des Moines is French for the Moines. Like nobody really knows what it stands for. So we looked at some different cities around there, right? Kansas City, Chicago, Indianapolis, actually, Minneapolis, and Denver, and had some offers in different places. Moved up here in '97 just because we wanted to move on to the next chapter in our lives. And Minnesota felt good. I'd come up here for a lot of family vacations, because being in Northeast Iowa, we'd come up here and go to Twins games and the Minnesota Zoo and Chanhassen Dinner Theater and lots of different stuff, Valley Fair. Yeah. So I've been up here for 4 or 5 vacations, and it was a pretty easy choice, actually. And we've been pretty happy. My ex-wife is still here too. So we've both been here now for 20 some years.
Awesome. So you then went to CoCentral, right?
Cotelligent was the name of it.
Cotelligent, that's right. Yep.
And any local listeners might recognize that they were a parent company of ESP for a while, because ESP is still around after Cotelligent folded. ESP bought it back out. And so I ran the Lawson software division of Cotelligent. They were a national consulting firm. They had recruiting and placement, and then some different practice areas for different software solutions. Lawson software was a big software solution, started out of St. Paul. I think now it's owned by Infor, if I remember right. But I ran the consulting division for that for just about 3 years. That's where I first started to get into e-commerce, actually. Our first exposure, my first exposure was running the back end side of a Office Max e-commerce launch. So pretty significant e-commerce exposure way back in 1998.
Right.
So I'm a dinosaur by e-commerce standards.
And when was e-commerce was it around that time, the late 90s, when e-commerce was beginning a thing? Like I remember I was at S&T Office Products, and it was in the early 2000s, and I remember they were behind the eight ball because everybody and their brother was going to e-commerce and online purchasing, and that was a challenge. Was it about that time, 98? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, God, I can't even imagine what that user experience would be like.
Oh,
What it is now, but there was a lot of chatter amongst retailers. There was no B2B kind of conversation. It was all B2C, or a lot of people call it now D2C, direct to consumer, e-commerce related conversations. But like I remember in 1994, I would have to walk from one principal building to another to get on the internet, and I was going on to these 2Kiss websites that had all these pictures and stories and all this kind of stuff. That was my first real deep foray into the internet. So by 98, e-commerce was starting to become a thing.
yeah. Yeah. So you spent some time there, and then how did you get recruited over to Wilson's Leather?
I don't remember. I don't know if I was recruited, to be honest, or if I saw an opening online or somewhere. To be honest, it's a good question. I don't remember exactly how I ended up there. But I hadn't interviewed in about 3 years. And so I thought, well, I'll go take this interview. Not all that interested in retail and in that brand. I didn't have a negative connotation with them at the time. I didn't have like really any connotation or affinity. But I thought, well, I'll get back in the swing of interviewing. Went there and actually loved it. The HR gentleman that interviewed me, very engaging, told a good story about about Wilson's Leather.
Yeah.
And, it was really cool walking through there. They had racks of coats in different places, and you could smell them and touch them, and it just had a cool vibe. And I walked out of there, got my car, and thought, man, I might take that job if that emerges. Like, I really liked that.
Yeah.
So that ultimately developed, and I was there for like right around 4 years. Rolled out their e-commerce. Also did a lot of CRM work there. I feel like Wilson's is where I started to really develop a point of view about how things should work or could work. Like our IT department made a shift from being the stereotypical IT department that people didn't like to work with and felt like an inhibitor to a strategically positioned IT department. We started to implement best of breed software solutions instead of trying to build everything custom. We ramped up our business analysts dramatically and ramped down our developers, worked with a consulting firm that we had a close relationship with to use their developers. We started to plant some of our business analysts into the business units. And by plant, I don't mean as spies, but we would place them, I guess is the better way to put it, in the business units. So we started to really build some deep relationships. And ultimately, we started to go to the merchants conferences with them, and they would work with us on, hey, how quickly could we implement this, or how could we enable this technology, right? They viewed us as enablers, not inhibitors.
Yeah. So then you, and when we were having our conversation, kind of a little bit of prep, and I remember you mentioned this too, is that when you were at Wilson's Leather, it was the Irish Titan idea, or a few Irish Titan related ideas were kind of ruminating in the back of your brain. Why didn't you pull the trigger on that when you decided to leave Wilson's Leather?
Yeah. I always knew I was going to be doing my own thing. A lot of people were surprised, or to this day are surprised, that I didn't start to do my own thing sooner. I was 34 when I started Irish Titan. I'm not the easiest to manage, don't necessarily take direction well, often wrong, never in doubt, sort of things. But again, back to good bosses, like I had great bosses that I felt would challenge me, but let me make mistakes and give me some breadth on the field. And so I never quite had that FU moment where I feel really constricted. And I think if I would have had that earlier, I would have started my own company earlier. But at Wilson's, as I was saying, we had a really good run in the IT department. We really felt like we'd improved a lot of the underlying capabilities of the business as a whole, about how we were strategically leveraging technology. Yet at the same time, Wilson's business performance, revenues, and especially profits were declining. And I found that super frustrating because if we use a football analogy, I didn't want to be special teams. I wanted to be offense or defense, one of the teams that's making a difference in winning or losing the game. And so I found it incredibly frustrating that as good a job as we were doing, we weren't able to materially impact Wilson's performance. And so that's when I almost started Irish Titan, because I was finishing up my MBA at St. Thomas, had a great experience there, had a couple of ideas. I'll let you guide me in that part of the conversation. But I was just about to start Irish Titan when another opportunity emerged at Second Swing Golf. I'll jump ahead a little bit if you're okay with that.
Yep. Yeah, go for it, man.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I want.
Yeah. So Second Swing emerged. I had some former Wilsons and Cotelligent employees over there. And they said, hey, our CIO position is going to be opening. We think you'd be a great fit for this. I think you'd like it. Maybe check it out. So I did. I'm not a good golfer. Actually, I don't know if we can swear or not. You can beep this out.
Yeah, go for it.
And love sports, but shitty golfer. So much easier. Like that ball's not moving, right? That was during Tiger's run. So there was a lot of energy in the industry. Interviewed, really did like it right away, and I expected that. But my Wilson's experience was so frustrating, not with the company, but just the level of impact that I could have. I think impact's an important word that emerges in Irish Titan's story. I took, in talking with the CEO and the board, I said, well, I'm only going to take this job if I have P&L responsibility, because I want to materially impact the business. And so they gave me P&L for everything digital, which was great because then I built an e-commerce channel there that was profitable right away. Had a really good run with the digital business. I felt like Wilson's is maybe where I grew up and started to have a point of view. Second Swing was the first position where I felt like I had a position that had the responsibility and authority and challenge that I was really thirsting for. So that's a quick recap of my Second Swing.
What were those? So just to rewind a little bit, what were the 3 business plans that you had when you were working through your MBA?
Yeah. So one was what we've become, an e-commerce agency.
Yep.
2 was a CRM agency, because I've done a lot of CRM work at Wilson's. I found that really interesting too. I like the psychographics and demographics to targeting and profiling customers and learning about how your business is performing in those ways. And then the third idea was actually a fitness technology product that I think was ahead of its time. And a lot of people could say that. Like, I'm not saying that I'm necessarily the greatest inventor, but a lot of people come up with ideas that are great ideas and just ahead of their time because maybe the market's not there or the technology's not there. But my third idea was a Palm Pilot, for those of you who remember Palm Pilots, right?
I do.
Palm Pilot, and I wanted to develop what we would now call an app for your fitness routines on there, so you could lay out your weightlifting, your cardio, or whatever you were doing. And that's okay, but I think what made it a killer idea, and this was back in 2004, what made it a killer idea was I wanted to implement a thumbprint swipe security, so you would personal identification, maybe is a better way to put it, and then incorporate a heart rate monitor, which at the time were those bands you put around your chest, couldn't do it on your watch. And then sports teams like the Minnesota Vikings or the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm a Steelers fan, could lease the equipment and the software out. They could lease it from us and then assign it to all their players, so that in the off season they could design the workouts that would be appropriate for linemen versus wide receivers versus linebackers. Or a basketball team could do the same thing, or a sports injury clinic, or just not even sports injury clinic, but just a rehab clinic could lease the equipment and software from us and assign that to maybe someone who had a car accident and needs rehab walking again. And the heart rate would let you see how their body's responding, walking on a treadmill at 2 miles an hour. So that was the idea I had in 2004, which, exists now, that I didn't have the network or funds or access to funds, I should say, back then, like I do now. But those were the three ideas that I had written out: business plans, marketing plans, and finance plans for all three in my MBA.
And so if you were to take out that last one they were talking about, what was the final decision that you decided to go with, e-commerce versus CRM?
I had more passion for it. And it felt like, well, it emerged a little more easily. So it was both passion, and so maybe passion drove the easier emergence. Who knows, chicken and egg, right?
Yeah.
But I did have more energy around that, and it seemed to materialize sooner. I did have some CRM stuff going early too, but never picked up the traction, and no traction as quickly as the digital, specifically the e-commerce.
So what was the landscape of e-commerce at that time? Like, it's changed so dramatic. You know, to me, it seems like as I've gotten to know you, it changes from year to year, right? Like these big entities that are kind of the engines behind this are now rearing their heads. But tell me a little bit about what that looked like at that time.
Well, at that time, it was very technically driven. There weren't software packages like there are now. So Shopify, that probably everybody's heard of, didn't even exist when I started Irish Titan. Like, it literally didn't exist. And so we were building the solutions from scratch. When I implemented at Cotelligent first, and then Wilson's, and then Second Swing, they were giant sort of monolithic platforms that we would select and implement. And there was just a heavy lift to getting the technology to work, right? And so those packages were all really burdensome, high TCO, total cost of ownership back then. And so when we started to do e-commerce, we tried to find our way in between the cracks there, using some open source tools and some things like that to build the early components of an e-commerce solution. One of the things that we did at the very beginning was we built a content management solution into all of our work. And you have to remember, for anybody who's been around long enough, and for anybody, any youngsters who haven't been around long enough to remember this, back in the day, most companies like an Irish Titan would build your site and not allow you to make changes. They did that on purpose. So you would have to call the company like Irish Titan and have them change the address. Like, if you move offices, you would have to call your web provider to have them go on your website and change your address. And that always seemed insane to me. Quite honestly, I don't want to deal with that bullshit. Like, that's not high value work for us either. So from the very beginning, we always had a content management system, which allowed our clients, whether they were merchants or a brochureware site, to log in and change all kinds of things on their own. And that was a big selling point for us, because it was very different. And some of our competitors at the time would say, well, why are you doing that? Because like, then they don't have to call you and you can't bill them for that. I'm like, I don't want to bill them for changing their address. There's no challenge to that.
Right. So you were building Irish Titan. How many employees did you kick it? I mean, obviously you were employee number one, but how many did you have within the first year?
Within the first year, within the first year, one. I was lucky enough to hire someone from a previous stint, a kid at the time, a man now, Tegan Snyder, great guy. I was really fortunate to have him as my first Titan. And I think that's because he was that mix that's hard to find of a developer who could do some pretty complex development stuff, but also had some pretty strong design skills. So for a company at our stage doing work the caliber that we were doing, he was extremely talented and capable of covering all of the bases on the design and development side, and I was doing everything else. So in the first year, Tegan was our only employee. And then our next employee was probably the year after that, and was another developer. I probably hired two developers, and then a designer, and then project management, and started to build out from there.
And one of the things that I forgot about totally, and I don't think a lot of people know, is you actually sold Irish Titan in 2009.
Yeah. Yep. So there's a local private equity management consulting firm. They might characterize themselves a little bit differently now, because this is 12 years later.
Yeah.
But at the time, that's how I characterized them, called the Platinum Group. And at the time, they had a portfolio of companies, I think 2 of which were our clients. And so we had started to work closely together. And I only had a couple of employees at this time, remember, too.
Yeah.
And so I developed a strong relationship with Platinum, and they expressed an interest in buying Irish Titan so that they could have kind of an in-house arm, better servicing their portfolio and really augmenting their capabilities of what they could bring into the portfolio. In buying Irish Titan, they wanted to explore me joining the firm so that I would spend about half my time on Irish Titan and half my time on Platinum work. And so we ended up dancing and finally making the sale. And I sold it to them in 2009. I bought it back in 2011. And during those 2 years, I'd give Platinum a lot of credit. They let me run Irish Titan. They forced me into some governance that I probably wouldn't have done otherwise, which was probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm looking them on that. I learned a lot from them. It's up to them to say whether or not they learned anything from me, but I had a good experience. But about halfway through that 2-year run, I was going through divorce and at the same time wanting to buy Irish Titan back. And both of those are sort of self-reflective periods. So I was working through, on the business side, why did I want to buy Irish Titan back? So I wanted to be able to articulate it the right way so they didn't seem like I was being impetuous or ungrateful or anything like that, right?
Right.
So worked through all that, bought it back in 2011. That was a big point in Irish Titan's history because what really facilitated that clarity about why I wanted to buy Irish Titan back and why I was navigating some of the personal stuff and what I think was by divorce standards, pretty good manner, was I actually had the fortune of meeting Simon Sinek in person. And our golden circle emerged, my personal why emerged, and all of that gave me the framework to have the conversation with Platinum, for example, about why I wanted to buy Irish Titan back. And my personal why is to leave a legacy. That informs in retrospect, some of the reasons that I named Irish Titan, because there were 3 specific criteria that emerged. That definitely shaped why I wanted to buy Irish Titan back, right? Because I really started to figure out what I wanted to do with Irish Titan, and I wanted to buy it back so that I could really be the one without some of the governance. And again, they weren't impinging on me, but I just my vision had really emerged. And so I wanted to buy it back to build the company that I wanted it to be, to leave a legacy. It's also why I was navigating my divorce in a certain way. It was important to me to take good care of my daughters, to be a good father. They're 21 and 17 now, but they weren't then, right? And so it was important to be a good father because they're my legacy. So to leave a legacy is my personal why, and all that stuff emerged in 2010, 2011.
So in this podcast, I want to make sure that I always kind of point out a spot where I feel like someone has their paradigm shift. And most people, it's when they start their business, right? I actually think that was your paradigm shifting moment was that you actually started the business, you sold it to Platinum, and then you rebought it back because then you figured some things out that are driving you internally. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes and no. I would agree that was definitely a paradigm shift. Or at least a big milestone. I do think when I started Irish Titan was a big milestone though too, because Second Swing during my run there ended up filing bankruptcy, and the bank appoints a receivership. The receivership steps in, assesses everything, makes all the decisions about who's going to stay, who's not, all that sort of thing. Yeah. They kept the CFO to handle the bank account, and they kept me to do everything else, and then got rid of the rest of the C-suite. And so for 4 months, I liquidated stores, negotiated payables, liquidated inventory, all that, tried to maintain the employees we needed to run payroll and close down the stores. Everybody knew we filed bankruptcy, so trying to do all that while maintaining some level of spirit in the office, that was really tough, really tough. And I found it really frustrating because the P&L that I could control was in great shape, right? So back to that, having a material impact in the business, I could have material impact in the business compared to Wilson's, but still not enough to keep the business not just going, but growing. Yeah. And so when I walked out of Second Swing, literally being the one to shut the lights off, literally, that's when I'm like, I'm starting Irish Titan. I'm going to succeed or fail on my own merits. So that was definitely a paradigm shift too. I think the paradigm shift when I repurchased Irish Titan was the real emergence of pretty strong clarity and vision about what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it.
Yeah. When you, every business as they go, they have some growing pains. 2016, 2017 were a couple rough years. I think those were some years that you've said to me that they've kind of defined you as a leader in making some challenging decisions, and it also was culture defining times. Talk to me a little bit about that time in the growth.
Yeah, so we've had a pretty good run at Irish Titan and have grown pretty considerably. We were going through a big time growth spurt then. And I think that a good friend of mine, Rich Anderson, one of the co-owners of Imagine IT, told me a long, long time ago that you can really only focus on growth or operations one at a time. You can't really focus on both at the same time. And I had been focusing on growth so much that our operational boat started to crack. We started to leak a little bit and get some water in that boat. And 16 and 17 turned into really, really rough years.
Yeah.
Some of that was a combination of the amount of growth we were experiencing. Some of it was the fact that we were working with an e-commerce platform that at the time went through a big new release. We were early to using it and it was not ready for prime time. So we had a ton of problems with that. Some of it was I had not invested in enough training and growth for some of my management team at the time. And so they weren't prepared to do some of the things that we needed to in the face of all that growth and an e-commerce platform that was really struggling. So I think that, some of my takeaways from that, that's probably when I learned the most, which isn't all that surprising, right? Like you learn in times of challenge. But I think that, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is reality, is a theory, philosophy saying that I learned at the time. I learned that, good leaders put their businesses under a microscope during troubled times, because I did. Like I was tearing apart everything and figuring out what needed to be fixed and I'll put it back together. But great leaders put their business under a microscope all the time so that you don't get into those problems.
Yeah.
I think our culture has been really consistent since 2011. That's when our golden circle emerged. Our why is business first, online second. It's trademarked, framed, and hanging up at our door over there. Our how is partnerships, not transactions. Our what at first was e-commerce and complex websites with a focus on user experience. That was our 2011 what. Our what now is building and growing e-commerce channels. So that's evolved. But that golden circle has been in place since 2011. And our internal values are POTUS, passion, ownership, teamwork, impact, back to impact I mentioned earlier, and skills. So POTUS and our golden circle are sort of the two lighthouses that we use to define our culture. And then I say it's surrounded by shenanigans, right? Because I do expect us to work hard. That's maybe the farm upbringing or just general work ethic, but life's too short not to have a lot of fun along the way. Right. So, I'm pretty explicit about that. So our culture has been consistent, but what I learned at that time was that we didn't have enough, we had let a little bit too much focus and prioritization of shenanigans emerge and not enough focus on accountability. And people talk about accountability being to a number, which is true, but really accountability is to a person. And that goes back to me focusing too much on growth at the expense of, or the revenue, the vanity side of things, rather than the cash reality side of things, because operations is what really drives that. I hadn't invested enough in some of my management team training to allow them to hold people more accountable to some of the numbers. So there was a lot of reflection during those periods. And the thing though, I never really questioned whether or not we were going to make it, right? Like all my eggs, all my potatoes are in Irish Titan. So I've burnt my white flag, I've burnt my ships at the shore. So there was never really any question about whether we were going to make it. It was just, how are we going to make it? Because there's no other option.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's move forward to present tense now. So we are, you're in a time that I got to believe is a good time for e-commerce because of, the state of our society and what's been going on. So how are things going at Irish Titan now? And then I want to talk a little bit about what you see for the future.
Yeah, yeah. So things are going great. Doesn't mean there aren't things to improve, right? It gets back to
Right.
that point about putting your business under a microscope all the time. But 16 and 17 were rough. 18, we righted the ship. Is that the right past tense? And we've been on a good run since then. 2020 was a good year for us because we are long-standing e-commerce experts. So we're not a general digital agency that tried to get into e-commerce in 2020 during the pandemic. So we have existing, long-standing, deep, intimate relationships with e-commerce technology companies like Shopify, Magento, BigCommerce, ShipStation, ShipperHQ, Digital, eMarcis, Vertex, Avalara, Nosto, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
So we've had relationships with them for years. And so as e-commerce really lifted last year, I mean, it's been growing, but it exploded last year for unfortunate reasons with the pandemic.
Right.
We were well positioned. So we had a good 2020. Our 2021 is off to a great start. A lot of that I attribute to the management team. I have a team that I've been working on this for years. And I would say about a year ago was when everything really started to come together. And I have a management team that is high on both the trust and the performance matrix. And they've really enabled us to execute well and start to build some pretty significant growth plans. So, I think that one of the things that we're thinking about going forward, so we're an EOS shop with self-implemented, but I'm also like a Braveheart fan, like a Battle fan, this sort of thing, right?
Yep.
I get called Braveheart sometimes, especially when I'm in my kilt. Our battle cry for 2021 and probably 2022 is Rise of the Titans. And
Love it.
there's a tagline to that says from better to bigger, because the last few years, think back to 16 and 17, we needed to get better.
Yeah.
And you have to get better before bigger, because better is how you get bigger. So we've been spending the last few years investing in our project management practice, which is absolutely killing it now. Our general operations, our KPIs, our tools, our process, all of that sort of stuff to get better has really been paying off. And so we had to get, so we're moving from better to bigger with this Rise of the Titans. So we've had some swag made up and are building campaigns around that saying, Rise of the Titans.
Give me a couple of examples of what Rise of the Titans means and expansion and growth. What does that mean in your world?
Yeah, so does mean a couple of very specific things. One, we are sort of passively, I hate that word passively, softly
There we go.
in the acquisition phase. We're not going to sell. We're in a hot market. There's lots of people reaching out to companies like mine to buy them. I'm not interested in selling right now. I'm interested in buying other companies. And so acquisition is part of our growth strategy. Organic growth is still a big part of our strategy, and we're doing a whole bunch of things to invest in that. But we feel like we can accelerate it with some acquisition because of our from better period over the last few years. We're ready to acquire other companies and bring them into Irish Titan. So acquisition is part of it. We're also actually going to expand geographically, which a lot of people are like, why would you expand geographically right now? Like everybody's going remote. Well, I think there's going to be a massive overcorrection to going remote. I think that people are going to overlook the value of beauty pageants, meeting people in person for either pints or coffee or lunch or whatever it might be, right? And so we want to lean into that with some geographic expansion where we have some different offices identified, potential offices around the country identified, beginning with Austin, Texas. I'm actually going to actively be pursuing that this year, where these offices are going to be sort of tip of the spear sales in air quotes offices. And I say air quotes because sales could mean new business, could mean channel relationships, how we work with our technology partners, BigCommerce, Shopify, Magento, et cetera, as I mentioned before. Could be accounts, how we work with existing clients somewhere. But our office here is going to remain our headquarters. I mean, we can only have one bat pole. I'm not going to have
that. Right.
And so this will be our headquarters, but we're going to open up other offices that are going to establish our brand and our presence in other areas that are also going to accelerate our growth. And some of those offices are actually international.
Yeah. And that's, to me, that is just so exciting, right? Like I believe that if you look at just the trends, right, is that we've been all kind of cooped up here for a year plus 14, 15 months, whatever it is. And then there's going to be that correction period. Usually that takes 1.5 times to get back to normal. So now we're looking at 2 years of like people wanting to be intensely immersed into personal relationships, one-on-one connection, in-person connection. I think that I am with you 100%. I love that.
Yeah. And I think that, I want to sort of kilt up, if you will, and lean in on these opportunities when other people aren't going to, right? Like I think businesses in general, including agencies, and some of us could already have been remote before the pandemic. But I think there's going to be an absence of appreciation for the impact you can have in beauty pageants. And so I want to lean in on that and capitalize on that vacuum right now.
Yeah. Man, this is going to be so fun to watch the things that you do. I mean, I'm so admirable about the culture that you've built and the team that you have. I've spent time with your leadership team. You have such a good overall team and culture, and the impact that you can have on other regions and nationally/internationally. I think that there's going to be some awesome things to come out of this Minneapolis company, man.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And you've been helpful along the way. Like you are the reason I chose iSpace when we were building our new office. I felt like you understood the vision and brand and culture. And then as we become friends and had breakfasts and pints and stuff like that, you've been a good sounding board. So appreciate the help on getting to where we find ourselves today.
You're one of the few people I've actually had out to the farm in the barn, and we've had pints out in the barn. And I want our listeners to know that you showed up in this shitbox Jeep that I never thought that you would have shown up on, with no shirt and like jean cutoffs. And I'm like, what is going on? That was hilarious. And you did eventually put a shirt on, so I appreciate that. But that was classic, man. Like I am so happy to have a friend like you that continues to keep me laugh, but then pushes me to be a better person.
That Jeep is my baby. I bought that for $4,000 on a gravel road in Iowa. And you can tell that I put a lot of money into keeping that thing running.
Yeah.
And I think it was camo shorts, camo cargo shorts.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, you have a much better, I have this idealistic idea in my head of what I wanted you to look like. And it was short jean shorts. Let's leave it at that. All right. We're going to transition into 9 questions because I've taken way too much of your time, and we want to have a little bit of fun here. So 9 questions. I'm going to fire 9 questions. Do we both agree that I did not prep you on what these questions are, right?
Yes, I do hereby solemnly swear I have no idea what these questions are.
All right. We're going to get going here. Ready? What is your biggest pet peeve?
Semicolons.
Why semicolons?
What purpose do they serve? Use the period.
Right.
Or write your sentence differently. I hate semicolons. I also hate how some pin pads, red for credit, green for debit, other ones opposite. Another one of my pet peeves. Super Bowl should be on Saturday, not on Sunday.
Oh, I love that one. Yeah. We could probably riff on a lot of pet peeves. I agree with you wholeheartedly on that third one. What do you own that you wish you didn't?
That's a good question. I'm a pretty good purger. Like my basement isn't too full of stuff. So I think that I've kept all the CDs that I had at one point. And there's probably some embarrassing CDs in that stash of I have 20-some thousand songs in my iTunes, and it was probably 5-6 years ago where I just started to do digital and not even buy the CDs, maybe a little bit longer. There's probably some CDs in there that'd be pretty embarrassing.
All right. So there's going to be a big movie coming out here in about 5 years. It's called Rise of the Titans, the Irish Titan story. Who plays you?
Ooh, great question. I would need to think of some of the younger, Jason Momoa.
That's so funny. I was actually having coffee with another person, a mutual acquaintance, and she referenced Jason Momoa as you. So that is actually really hilarious.
Oh, really? Well, we'll stick with that then.
All right, that's good.
If he's unavailable, then we'll say Chris Hemsworth.
All right, very nice. Both very good choices. All right, I want you to close your eyes.
Okay.
What's your favorite smell?
Vanilla.
Oh, that's an interesting answer. All right, you can open your eyes again.
Okay.
What was your absolute very first job?
My first job, not counting working on the farm, my first job was working at the Dairy Treat. That's what it was called in my hometown, not a Dairy Queen. It was a Dairy Treat. I would ride my moped in there. It would take me like 25 minutes to get there on this moped that went 25 miles an hour. And I worked there for 2 years, I think. When I started, my hourly wage, $1.25.
That's insane, right? Like that's so did the Dairy Treat get sued by Dairy Queen, do you think?
No, I don't think so.
No,
In
no,
fact, it's
no, no
cool.
bad blood.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it is. My younger sister worked there. I don't know if my younger brother did. My dad probably wondered what the hell I was doing, leaving the farm, making more money to ride the moped in there to work. But the help at the Dairy Treat was a little more attractive than the help
Right.
that we got on the farm. And so when I was 14, that was a big priority.
Plus free ice cream.
Plus free ice cream, yes, and burgers.
Right. You remember that movie in the 80s called Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd?
Yeah.
Who would you want to trade places with if there was one person that you could trade places with for one day?
Let's see. It's an interesting question, right? Because you could do a whole bunch of things more serious, like a Fauci or somebody in the public space like that. I think that actually I'm going to choose a gentleman by the name of Mark Cohn. So he was a mentor of mine, someone I've learned a lot from. He now lives down in Belize and is someone that has built multiple businesses, been through a lot of heartbreak along the way, and is the closest in person I've ever come to an Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi.
Yeah.
So trade places with him and be that kind of person and have that sort of wisdom and perspective, I think would be pretty compelling.
Awesome. I referenced at the beginning when I opened that you're a huge comic book collector. Who is your favorite superhero?
Easy, Batman. I've been a Batman guy since I was a kid. I do have about 15,000 comics in my basement. I'm DC all the way, not Marvel. Marvel does good movies. DC comics are much, much better. It's fact, not opinion. But my second favorite hero, this is one maybe more interesting, is Nightwing, who is the original Robin, Dick Grayson, grown up, and he doesn't want to be Robin anymore because he's a grown man, so he's Nightwing, and he's my second favorite.
Nice. When is the last time you laughed so hard you cried?
Probably last summer. Some buddies from Northeast Iowa and we were in the same high school conference, but we didn't meet until, other than playing sports, we didn't meet till college. We were all Hawkeyes, became really good friends. We got together at one of his places in Northeast Iowa and went tubing down the river and had a few too many craft beers along the way and had a really good time. So that was probably the last time I laughed so hard I cried. I know that I tipped over multiple times. So yeah.
It's always embarrassing because then you get that ugly face, right? That ugly cry face. I hate that, but I love it at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Last question. What is the single best piece of advice that you've ever received?
I think that actually, ironically, this is from Mark Cohn. He helped me a lot, especially during 16 and 17, but this was before he had moved to Belize. And I was working through course correcting a lot of the Irish Titan stuff, and he said that at some point you need to make a shift from thinking of Irish Titan as an owner and think of it as an investor, because that puts a different perspective into your mind about how you grow the business if you think of it as an investor, not an owner. So that was the best business advice I received. I think maybe it's because it was timely. I think that on the personal side, someone a long, long time ago told me when I was going through my divorce, I was trying to make sure, how to maintain a good relationship with my daughters. That was super important to me. Someone said that it's long days, but short years. And I think that really stuck with me too.
Yeah. Where can people find you, Darin?
So I'm pretty visible. My email is darin.lynch@irishtitan.com. I'm also on LinkedIn a lot. You can find me on Twitter. I think it's it's at Lynch_Darin. I don't even know.
Yeah.
I don't tweet a lot. I think tweeting is like texting for people without friends. But I am out there. It's pretty easy to find me. If you search Darin Lynch, you'll find me.
Awesome. I can't thank you enough for being on. You spent a lot of time with me today. This is going to be our inaugural episode, and I couldn't think of a better person to have on the first episode, man. I really, truly appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Aaron. I am honored and humbled to be both part of your group and part of your world and be the first published guest. So thanks for that.
Thanks, brother. On behalf of Darin Lynch, this has been the Power of Nine podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Eggert, and I want to thank you for the privilege of your time. Thank you.